All right, we are recording.
Great. Thanks, everybody. I'm Steve Albaron from Confident Cannabis, and I'm joined by Taylor Voice, who's also from Confident Cannabis, and he's the account manager for Oklahoma Labs. So we'll go ahead and get started. Today, we're discussing the Confident Cannabis plus Metrc integration. So as many of you know, Metrc is being rolled out in Oklahoma and across the country bit by bit. And so Confident Cannabis has built an integration with Metrc to greatly streamline your laboratory workflow and save you several hours of manual entry and potential errors. As a reminder, this webinar will be recorded and we will be sharing the slides of this afterwards. So no need to panic and take notes. We will distribute this either later today or tomorrow as soon as we can. And it should be a good guide for you to train your current staff, but also potentially new staff that you bring on board in the future. Thanks. All right, so the agenda for today, we'll do a quick introduction, and that'll include a brief background on Confident Cannabis and Metrc, what we do and how we overlap, and a little bit about what the Metrc reporting requirements are for laboratories, what Confident Cannabis does with Metrc, and why you should integrate with Metrc and your Confident Cannabis account. And then finally, a little bit about how the integration works from a technical perspective, not very detailed there. So that'll be a kind of high level overview, that introduction section, but then we're gonna go deep into the detailed tutorials. And so this is very much in the weeds. It's meant to be step-by-step instructions for you to understand how to use Confident Cannabis to integrate with Metrc, some of the considerations or caveats that might exist, some things that you can do, some things that you cannot do for various reasons. And so section 2 will be very in the weeds, which will be helpful to train your team and kind of study later on. If you don't follow everything right now, like I said, that's okay. You'll have access to these slides and you can print them later. They're meant to be readable without hearing the audio as well. And then finally, the third section, we'll be doing a little bit of pro tips and gotchas. Pro tips being things that are kind of good to know, shortcuts or kind of best practices. And then gotchas being those things that might trip you up if you weren't aware of them. And so, errors that might happen or kind of blockers that you might experience and how you can overcome them. So with that, actually, and then after this, we'll have a little bit of Q&A. So this should be about a 45-minute presentation, and then we'll have about another 15 minutes for Q&A if there are any. All right. So to start, a little background on Confident Cannabis. So Confident Cannabis is the leading cannabis laboratory information management system, or LIMS, in the United States. Currently, about 60% of labs use Confident Cannabis across the country. And we have customers in 39 states and a couple of Canadian provinces. And as far as volume, we typically do around 70,000 samples per month. Since inception, we've done over 1 million samples, and we were founded in 2015. At the bottom, you can see a map of all the states where we participate in green, and you can kind of look at the Metrc map on the right and see that overlap. So Metrc, this is from their website. They're the leading cannabis regulatory system. They're in 15 states. And again, according to the website, they've tracked over 1 billion events. So very much becoming the standard in the cannabis industry for track and trace. So what are the Metrc reporting requirements for labs? So regulators require licensed labs to record various things in Metrc. Those things include sample intake. So during sample intake, you need to record who gave you the sample, so the client and their license, the quantities and weights that you received from them, and then when you received them. A lot of other details around transferring the cannabis to another third party. Obviously, that's what Metrc is primarily for. But then labs have a special set of requirements around reporting the test results back into Metrc. So the state wants labs to enter the analyte values for every analyte that is tested, or at least the analytes that are required under law. And so that's just a lot of data points. If you think of all the pesticides, all the cannabinoids, all the residual solvents, et cetera, that you might need to report into Metrc, it's just a lot of manual entry otherwise. They also want you to upload the PDFs of the certificates of analysis to Metrc. So quite a bit of clicking there. And then finally, the sample weights on hand and destruction reason dates. So as you consume sample material during your testing, they want you to tell Metrc how much you have at the end of the day. And so as you consume it over time, you always have an accurate inventory balance of the material you have at the laboratory. And so the punchline being, manually entering all of this information into Metrc can take many hours, which means you might need to hire additional staff, which means that there's more cost, and it's just very cumbersome. So we integrate with Metrc, and the way that works is Metrc has an API, and if you don't know what an API is, you can basically think of it as a way for two software companies to communicate with each other over the internet. That's all you need to know. So Metrc has an API that allows third-party software systems like us to read and write in Metrc. So we can pull information down from Metrc, and then we can push information up to Metrc. So Confident Cannabis has a signed agreement with the state. Right now we're talking about Oklahoma, but in all the various states where we integrate with Metrc, we all have a signed contract with all of those different state governments. And then we also were evaluated by Metrc and were given approved integrator status. So not anybody can just integrate with Metrc, you have to kind of go through these steps. So we've done all of that. And so in exchange for passing those steps, Metrc provides us with our own API key. And this is sort of the keys to the castle, so to speak. But then every lab employee who uses Metrc also gets their own API key. And I'll show you how to get that out of Metrc in a moment. But together, our API key plus the lab employee's API key allow the lab to do things in Metrc through Confident Cannabis, right? So that's how these two things work together. So at a very high level, things that Confident Cannabis can do with Metrc, you can kind of think of it as a bookend. So information comes down from Metrc into Confident Cannabis, and then we can push information from Confident Cannabis into Metrc. So with a few clicks, you can easily create new orders in Confident from Metrc transfers. So that'll greatly increase your sample intake time, and it'll also reduce errors. You can create new samples in Confident Cannabis from Metrc Packages. So in Metrc vocabulary, your package is a unit of a thing, and it always has that RFID barcode tag on it. It's got the long alphanumeric number associated with it. So that's a package. And then you can record the sample intake weights from Metrc. You can submit the analytical results back to Metrc. That's the big one. It's submitting the results back to Metrc with a few clicks. And then finally, recording the weight changes and submitting that back to Metrc. And so we'll go through these broad categories now in these tutorials. So, in closing, like, why integrate with with Metrc? So it'll save you lots of hours of expensive labor. It'll minimize transcription errors, which might not seem like a lot now, but speaking from experience, there could be a fat finger error which causes a sample to pass when in fact it failed because the person just clicked the wrong radio button in Metrc, and that might cause audit findings of your lab, which time-consuming, painful, and the worst case scenario, it might cause a recall for your client. So they might have to pull products off the shelves, which is very embarrassing for the lab, very embarrassing for the client. And so, manually entering is just not a good solution for that. It also inserts compliance reporting. So everything that you do in Metrc is compliance reporting. It inserts it directly into your workflow in Confident Cannabis. So you don't have to think about, okay, I'm doing this over here, and then I have to remember to go do this over in Metrc. It kind of puts it right in the same workflow, so you don't ever, miss that step. Very importantly, it shortens your turnaround time, which really makes your customers happy. In this really competitive environment, clients really want to get their lab results as fast as possible so they can sell that inventory. Every day that they don't have the passing test results is a day they're not generating revenue. So turnaround time is a huge competitive advantage for labs who can operate efficiently. So in other words, you could manually type into Metrc, and here's just a visualization of all the fields. There's many, many more that are not screenshotted here. But imagine typing numbers and notes and pass fails for each analyte for everything that you do, for every sample that you do. Or we pre-populate a form in Confident Cannabis that lets you review everything at a glance, and then you click this submit to Metrc button, and it goes. So obviously much more efficient to do it that way. Now let's go into the detailed tutorials. If you have any questions along the way, please enter them into the Zoom chat. Taylor will attempt to field as many of those as we can. If some of them warrant discussion, we'll pick those up at the end of the call. But yeah, feel free to ask questions in the chat. So this is going to be detailed. Brace yourselves. If you don't catch everything, don't worry. You'll get these slides. You'll get the recording. So the first bucket of tasks are around sample intake. So taking data from Metrc and creating orders and samples in Confident Cannabis. So first step is, how do you get your API key? So in Metrc, if you log in, you click the drop-down arrow that's at the top right next to your username and select API keys. That'll bring up a page like this. If there's no API key in this field already, then click the generate button. If there is an API key already, then you might be using it for something else, in which case it's not a good idea to click generate again, because every time you click generate, it deletes the old API key. So if something is using it for something and you click generate, you'll break that connection. So if there's an API key already, grab that one. If that doesn't work for whatever reason, then generate a new one, but you can do that here. So drop down at top right, API keys. This field is a little bit hard to copy. Just as a pro tip, you can't really kind of highlight it. You have to double click it. So double click or triple click the thing and it'll highlight the whole key. So copy that. You definitely don't want to manually type it. All right. And then once you have that in your clipboard, it's saved in your clipboard. Then you go to Confident Cannabis, you go to settings and laboratory, and then you go to the regulators tab, and then you click the add new regulator credential button. Now, only admins can do this. So if you're not an admin in your Confident Cannabis account, you won't see the laboratory option in your settings. This laboratory option in your settings is where you can change your contact info, your menu of services, your team who has account access, all sorts of stuff. So, you know, the important stuff. That's why it's only available to admins. So this is where you can add your Metrc API keys. Importantly, you can have multiple API keys. So in Metrc, every user gets their own API key. You have the option to share the API key with all of your employees. So for instance, if you want the lab director's API key to be used by everybody, that's fine. That's up to you. You can choose that in a setting. I'll show you how to do that. But you should know that if you want everybody to have their own, they can all have their own, and you can have multiple here. So then that way Metrc knows who reported what, right? So once you've got the API key, once you click that button, you'll see a pop-up like this. It'll say log into Metrc. You can name that API key anything you want. So if it's particular to a user, you probably want to use their name so people know this is Taylor's Metrc API key. And if you want to date it just so you know when it was generated, that's fine. You don't have to. And then you just paste it in here. So like I was saying, if you want to restrict it to the current user and only let only let Taylor use it, then click this box. So that means that only people who are logged in under Taylor's Confident Cannabis account can use this API key. Otherwise, if you unselect that, then it can be used by anybody at the lab. And then you finally click submit. So one really cool thing about this is that both labs and your clients can do this. And you're saying, well, why would a client need to do this? Well, as you'll find out soon, a lot of the sample intake process can be done by your clients. And so that if you can get your clients to create their own orders and enter their own package IDs, then that could potentially save you a lot of time. It's something that you know, labs in Nevada, for example, have been very successful in doing, and it saves them a lot of time. We know that in other places, maybe it's hard to convince their clients to do it, or maybe they don't want to because they might make a lot of mistakes. It's up to you, and you don't have to do it for everybody. Maybe if you have kind of more, you know, larger, maybe more professional clients that you trust, you can instruct them on how to do it, and that could save you time if they're regulars. But you can always create orders for them, just so you know that your clients can do this as well. Okay, so creating orders from manifest. So this is new. When you enable Metrc access, you'll see these three buttons appear. So this is where you go to create a new order as usual. As you know, you would go to clients, select your client, click new order. You'll see these three new buttons here. So the big one is add samples for Metrc manifest. The reason it's the big one is because that's the most efficient, most commonly used one. And what that allows you to do is create a whole order in Confident Cannabis from an existing transfer. So I'm sure you've all had Metrc training so far, but a transfer is basically where your client takes a bunch of packages for samples that they want to test, and they send it a transfer to you in Metrc. That comes with a manifest number. And so all you have to do is click this green button and enter the manifest. If you don't want to create an order for Metrc, you don't have to. So if you have a client, maybe like a hemp client who's not in Metrc, something like that, you can always click the dark blue add new sample, and then that'll be the usual sample entry that you're used to. All right, so if you click that manifest button, then the first pop-up will be for you to select your client's license. So the client might have multiple licenses, and so it's important to select the license that is associated with the transfer to you. So in other words, if a client has a grower license and a processor license, but they're sending you manufactured edibles, you're going to want to select the processor license, not the grower license, right? Because that would be incorrect. So that's where you can do that. And if you don't see the license that you need, you can always click add new license right here. Then the next step is to select the Metrc API key that you'd like to use for this. So if you're sharing it, then you might have just one, but if you have multiple, you can select your own. Okay, and then finally, the next step here is to select your manifest. So you can see both categories of incoming manifests or incoming transfers. So both accepted transfers as well as pending transfers in the last 30 days. So pending transfer means that they've sent it to you, but you haven't clicked the receive button in Metrc. And then accepted transfers are those transfers that you have received in Metrc. You might want to create an order from either one. It depends. So you can look at that there. There's also a really important checkbox right here that allows you to filter this manifest list for just those transfers from the license that you're creating the order for. So in other words, we just created an order for Taylor's Grow, and we only want to see the processor license transfers, right? And so you would click that box for only show me those license transfers. If you uncheck this box, you'll see all of your transfers from all of your clients. There's some edge cases reasons why you might want to do that from time to time, but usually you'll want to click only from this particular license, so it's easier to see. And you'll see that this one has 2 samples, this one has 1 sample. You just click the one you want and submit. So then what it does is it pre-populates the order for you here. So normally you'd have to click add sample, fill in all the information, add sample, fill in all the information for everyone. This saves you a lot of time because it populates it with everything that we can get for Metrc. Now, it doesn't have everything that you would need. So Metrc doesn't give us everything. We put as much as we can here from Metrc, but Metrc doesn't have certain fields, like for instance, the test that they want to be performed on that sample, right? That Metrc doesn't know your menu. They don't know your kind of your test packages. So that's an example of something that you need to populate. And so this is a placeholder sample. And in order to proceed, you have to click this little green plus button to add the remaining fields. So when you do that, you'll see that the fields are populated with the information that we can get from Metrc. So that's the sample name, which is the package name, the matrix category, so plant. It'll populate with the Metrc sample package tag ID, so you don't have to scan that or anything like that or type that in. It'll come with the manifest number, but it doesn't have other things that you do need. So it doesn't come with the strain name. It doesn't come with the matrix type. So we know it's a plant, but we don't know if it's buds or trim or anything else. We also don't know if it's indica, sativa, or hybrid. We also don't know if it was indoor, outdoor, greenhouse. Metrc doesn't provide that information, and those are required fields in Confident Cannabis, so you'll have to select those. And then depending on the regulations in your state, you might have to add other fields to the COA. So the Metrc batch, the parent or source batch ID number is usually required. And that's something that your clients usually want to see on the COA, because that's the package tag that is on the batch that they have at their facility. So when they're looking at their reports, they want to say, okay, this is a COA for Blue Dream, but I've got 5 batches of Blue Dream. Which one is it? They'll look at the Metrc batch ID and then just find the batch in their facility and be able to match it that way. So you definitely want to add the Metrc batch number, but that doesn't come from Metrc. It's crazy. It should, but it doesn't. So you have to type that in or use a barcode. Highly recommend using a barcode scanner. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but if you scan the barcodes, it'll just print that long alphanumeric number in here for you, so you don't have any typos. And then finally, you need to select the tests that the client wants to be performed on that sample. So it's a placeholder sample. You need to add information, but it saves you a lot of time. And again, both clients and labs can do this. So your clients, when entering their own orders, they can benefit from this time savings as well. So let's say you want to just add a single sample. So you can do that too when creating a new order or when editing an existing order. So in both cases, you would click this light blue Add Metrc Sample button. So right here, we've got a new order. Right here, we're editing an existing order. You can just add a single sample if you'd like. In both those cases, you'll get a pop-up here that says Add Sample from Metrc. You just put the number in there, either copy paste or scan it or type it. And then it'll give you this window here that says Verify Sample Addition from Metrc. And so here it's where it'll show you all of the information that we get about that particular package from Metrc. And you can confirm, yeah, this is the right manifest number, it's the right tag number. Here's the licensee's name and the product name and category. So if it looks good, then you just click Verify. And you added the sample. All right, are you guys with me so far? Hopefully you're finding this helpful for your workflow. So now going into the middle step. So this is internally in the lab as you're processing your samples. Metrc isn't really something that you would be using directly, but the information from Metrc is helpful. So we'll show you how to do that. So one thing that you might want to do is add a Metrc package to an existing sample. So this is actually pretty common. So let's say your client creates an order, but they didn't do it like we just went through. So they didn't attach the Metrc packages on order intake. They just did it the old-fashioned way. And now you need to go back and add the Metrc packages to that sample. So there are a few ways that you can do that. In each case, you're going to want to edit that sample. And there are three primary places where you can edit the sample. So on the order page here, this might look familiar. You've got your list of orders. Each row of the samples in that order has an actions dropdown. You click that, and then there's an edit sample button. Similarly, on your LIMS page, so this is where you enter all of your data. There's an edit button in this top left quadrant where the sample information is. And then finally, if you look at the test results page that your clients would see, there's a sample actions dropdown and click edit sample. So all you have to do is edit the sample to open up the next window, which is the edit sample window you're familiar with. And then here you can click the plus from Metrc button. So this is a new button. You can put the information directly in the field if you want to, but you can also click plus from Metrc right here to add a new sample, and then you put in the package tag right here, and then the same verification page and click verify. So that's pretty common, adding packages to existing samples. And now you've got a whole bunch of samples in Confident Cannabis. You need to figure out which ones have Metrc packages associated with them, and importantly, which ones have been submitted and which ones have not been submitted to Metrc. So there are a few places you can see this. So there's the samples table. So if you just click samples and then samples list, this is just your typical list of all of your samples at different statuses. And you'll see right here, there's a column for the Metrc sample number. Similarly, on the order, you'll see there's a column for the Metrc sample number on the list there. And then also on the assay overview. So this is where you can see your individual statuses for each assay. So cannabinoids is reviewed, solvents hasn't been done, for example. But you'll see a column here for the Metrc sample. In both the sample list and the assay overview table, you can choose the columns that you see. So if the sample, the Metrc package tag number is somewhere else and you need to move it, you can control your columns there. So you'll also see these little arrows. So it's a little hard to see in the screenshot. It's small here, so I kind of blew them up right here. But there's some Metrc package numbers with a little orange up arrow, and some of them have a green up arrow. So the orange up arrow means that it has a package tag associated with it, but it has not been submitted to Metrc. So these are ones that, according to us in Confident Cannabis, we haven't tried to send it to Metrc. Now, if somebody's manually entered it into Metrc, then it's still going to stay orange because we didn't send it. We wouldn't know that it was manually entered. So just know that caveat there. But if we have sent it to Metrc, then it'll turn green. So that way you can quickly see your list on your assay overview. Okay, this one's been sent, this one hasn't been sent, right? And that'll be true whether the samples are in progress or they're completed. It doesn't matter, even if they're canceled or pending. So it's a convenient way to see the Metrc status there. All right, now for the most important part, reporting your results to Metrc. This is the part that'll really save you a lot of time. So there are a few ways to submit data to Metrc. The most common and the most efficient is submitting an entire order's worth to Metrc. So as most labs like to send all of their samples or all of their test results to a client in an order all at once. That way they get all of their test results back at once. You do have the option to do it sample by sample, piecemeal if you'd like, but most labs tend to do it on an order level. And so because of that, we also allow you to submit everything to Metrc at the order level. And the way to do that is when you go to complete an order, you'll see that there's a new toggle here that says send to Metrc. So before you used to always see send email to client, you can choose to email the client or not. Most of the time you do. You also see a send to Metrc toggle or not. It's defaulted to on. So the default is to send to Metrc because most of the time you probably do. But if you don't, for instance, if this is an order that maybe isn't fully complete, or maybe it's a client that doesn't have a Metrc account yet, or whatever it is, you can just toggle that off. But if it's on and you click complete, then you'll be able to initiate the cascade of steps to submit to Metrc. Another way to do it is if you look at the order actions dropdown and you don't want to complete the order and you want to, let's say, keep it in progress, or maybe it's already completed and you still want to submit to Metrc, then you can always click order actions and then submit order to Metrc, right? So again, the top one is when you're changing from in progress to complete. That's part of your workflow. That's what you do 90% of the time. And in certain cases, you don't want to complete the order in Confident, or maybe it's already been completed but not sent to Metrc, and you still want to submit to Metrc. You can do that. You go to order actions, submit order to Metrc. Okay. So that was for a whole order's worth. So that would be multiple samples at once. What if you want to do a single sample? So maybe you submitted 3 out of 4 samples to Metrc, but then there was one that took a little longer and you would do it the next day or something like that. So the way to do that, there are a couple places. So you can go to the test results page that your clients see and then click sample actions and then submit to Metrc. Or on the order page, on the sample row as well, you can click actions and then submit to Metrc. So both of those will initiate the submission steps for those samples. Now, what does that submission process look like? So the first time you submit results to Metrc or attempt submitting results to Metrc, you'll get these 2 dialog screens. You can proceed with these screens and then bail and not submit, in which case, if you try to submit it later, you won't see these 2 screens again. This is just a one-time thing per sample. So this is when you have to attach your packages to the samples in Confident Cannabis. And I say attach with air quotes here because even though the sample has the Metrc package number in the field, it's not connected, so to speak, to Metrc for that sample. It's just at that point, it's just a number that you can change whenever you want. But once you attach it, it's kind of more official. And so if you need to unattach samples, you might need to contact support or something like that. But in any case, when you go to submit, you'll see these 2 screens. The first one that says attach the sample to Metrc. It'll be pre-populated with your sample name, the Confident Cannabis sample ID, and the package tag number. It's just a step for you to change it if you made a mistake. You click submit, great. Then we retrieve all of the information we can get from Metrc about that package tag. It'll show your license number, the package tag again, the client's name and their license number, and then the product information. So for example, let's say this is, Northern Lights cartridge, but then here it's saying, sour diesel cartridge. Say, oops, I probably grabbed the wrong package tag. You can go back, change the tag to the right one, and then verify it again. So that's what this step is for, right? So once it's verified, then you get to this part, which is where we preview all of the data that we would be sending to Metrc. So this is actually the list of all of the fields that we would send for a cartridge, at least according to California regulations, but I don't think Oklahoma is that different. Once you get to the screen, it's asking you to verify, and you can see all of the sample information, and then you see cannabinoids and CBC, CBD, et cetera, all the cannabinoids down here. Then you see foreign matter, metals, microbials, mycotoxins, solvents, pesticides, terpenes, everything that gets submitted, you see right here. And then if that all looks good, then you click this green Submit to Metrc button. We send all of that to Metrc, and there's a little bit of a delay that's caused by Metrc. When they're receiving the data, they have to, review it quickly and then tell us if it was accepted. And so after the screen, which I don't have a screenshot for you here, you'll see a notification pop up telling you if it was successful or not. If you see an error, please take a photo of it. You can screenshot it with your computer, take a picture of it with your mobile phone, whatever it is. Take a picture of that, because that has the information we would need to help troubleshoot it. So send that to support@confidentcannabis.com if you attempt submitting something and you get an error from Metrc. Metrc doesn't have the best customer support, and even though we do everything we can to avoid those errors from happening, sometimes Metrc has a requirement that we didn't know about, and we have to make an update to our mappings, for example. So especially in the early days, as they're rolling out Metrc, there might be some fields that are new, or that they change things quite often without giving us advance notice. And so this is helpful for you, for us to help you, is to see that error notification if it does come up. But if it does go through, which is most of the time, then you just saved a bunch of time and you didn't have to enter all this stuff in manually. Another thing you can do is submit the sample weight changes to Metrc. So when you do your sample intake, it'll ask you if you want to record the weight on hand. So let's say you take in 10 grams worth of material, you would enter that upon verification in Confident Cannabis, but then you need to tell Metrc how much you've used up. So you can use this as a way to do that. So when you complete an order, it'll prompt you to decrease the weight on hand. So it'll show you all of the samples in that order, and then you can say, okay, I had 10 grams of material, I used 2 grams for testing. So you write the number 2 here, and you can do that for all the samples. That's how you change your weight on hand in Confident. But then when you submit your samples to Metrc, so this screen that we just looked at, the verify submission to Metrc, you'll see there's a section here, weight on hand, and it'll show you how much you've used up and the reason, so consumed in testing. And then you can choose to submit that to Metrc or not. So if you uncheck this, it'll just send the lab data. If you leave it checked, it'll send the lab data and the weight changes. So you have that option. That's when you're submitting the test results to Metrc. You can also view and edit the test batches from Metrc. So for those of you who are not familiar with what a test batch is, so a test batch is what Metrc calls basically the group of required fields for a particular sample. So when your clients go to create a package to send it to you for testing, they oftentimes have to select the test batch associated with it. And the test batches usually have fairly intuitive names that match the regulations. So this is Nevada, for example. The Oklahoma vocabulary might be a little bit different, but for instance, infused edible, infused non-edible, infused topical, raw plant material, for example, right? So when your clients are going to create the package to send to the lab, if it's a plant, or in this case, a cartridge, right? So this is a cartridge, that would probably be a non-solvent concentrate, or maybe a solvent-based concentrate, one of those, right? Let's assume it's a solvent-based concentrate. So they would have to select that. But in this example, they made a mistake. They clicked 3 of them. So infused edible, infused non-edible, and raw plant material. Obviously, something can't be those 3 things. And so even though that's what Metrc has, it doesn't mean it's right. And you didn't perform the test for all of those things. And so if you try to submit the lab results to a package that has incorrect test batches, then you'll probably get an error because Metrc is expecting certain required fields that are not relevant to this matrix, right? And so when you're going to submit, you'll want to review this. You'll want to uncheck the ones that are wrong and check the ones that are right. And then that'll submit to Metrc. Now, when you uncheck and check these things, it doesn't change it in Metrc. All it does is tell Metrc, it gives Metrc the information that they need to see, right? So knowing what test batches are related to those particular samples is important. Another thing you can do is maybe you want to just preview the data that would go to Metrc without actually submitting it. Maybe you're not sure if you're going to get an error, or maybe you're not sure if the data is complete or something like that. You can always preview the data. And the way to do that is going to the order and then finding that sample row, clicking actions, and then preview submit to Metrc. So that'll skip the attach the package process. It'll just show you what would be sent. What would be sent to Metrc if you wanted to proceed with that. So it's a nice previewed feature there. All right, we're done. Those are the detailed tutorials. Sure, you might have some questions. I guess before we go into the pro tips and gotchas, Taylor, are there any questions that we should answer right now from the chat room?
Yeah, I'm just getting back to a few of them now. The first one was from Russell. He had asked if a company has both a processor and a cultivation license, can we click 2 licenses if they have flower and processed samples?
Yeah, it's a good question. The answer is no, but not because we don't want to let you, but because Metrc doesn't allow that. So in Metrc's world, you can only have a transfer from one license to another. So even though the company, the organization has multiple licenses, they would have to send you 2 transfers, one for the flower, one for the manufactured products. And so that's okay because you have 2 transfers from Metrc, you would create 2 orders with those 2 different licenses. And they'll both show up in their Confident Cannabis account side by side, but they would be 2 separate orders. And that way the orders match 1-to-1 with the transfers in Metrc.
Great. Next question, not entirely around Metrc. What is the turnaround time for support emails? We do have a customer support manager that's on support 100% of the time, and then additionally 2 lab managers that are also viewing support. So if you have questions, we typically get back to you within the same day. If things are not looking like they're getting attention, just go ahead and give me a call, and we'll get it settled for you. And then what happens if a sample or entire order has been rejected due to package weight or other reasons?
Yeah, so if, for example, I assume the question is about if your client sends you a manifest or a transfer for, I don't know, let's say 10 grams, but then when you actually take the material back to lab and you weigh it, you see 5 grams. So pretty big difference, right? Somebody skimmed off the top as they were driving to the lab, for example, right? That's a good reason why you would want to cancel the transfer or reject the transfer in Metrc. There are rules and they vary state by state, and I don't want to give kind of regulatory advice, so you should definitely check. But I know that in most states, you have a little bit of wiggle room. So if the transfer that they created says 10 grams and you actually receive 9 or 9.5, there's a window of like plus minus 10%. Don't quote me on the 10% number, but there's a small window where they could say, okay, you can still receive the transfer, but when you receive it, in all cases, you have to enter the weight that you measure. And so they might say 10, you might get 10.1. They might say 10, you might get 9.5. That's okay. So you enter the 9.5 and you don't want to reject it. But in the case where there's a big difference, like 10-5, you should reject the transfer and then have them recreate the transfer for 5 so that it matches what you take. And then that way they're on the hook to account for that missing 5 grams, right? Now, if once you take possession of it, right? If it's your lab's employee who's driving it, obviously, then you'll want to do that weighing and that accepting of the transfer beforehand. But I think the question was, how does that canceling of a transfer, rejecting of a transfer affect Confident Cannabis? It wouldn't really affect Confident Cannabis because you wouldn't want to create an order for the 5 grams. You would reject the transfer and then create a new transfer that does match correctly and then proceed as usual. I don't know if that was answering your question or not.
Another question is, do we need a Metrc tag as the testing laboratory, example, storing or retention samples? Or can we use our own tags, the 16-digit Metrc batch on them?
Yeah, so the batch that you sample from at your client has a batch tag. And then when you go to collect the sample, that sample material will get its new tag. And that new tag is provided by your client. So in your client's Metrc account, they've got a batch, let's say, of 10 pounds of flour, and then they create a child package of 10 grams, and then that'll get assigned a new tag at their facility at the same time you're collecting the samples. And then that's what you can use to scan the barcode to create the sample in Confident Cannabis if you have like a mobile device or tablet there. If you don't, you just take you're going to take the tag with you anyway. You can do that back at the lab if you want. But in your client's account, they have a batch and a child sample. That child sample is what you take with you, and that already has a tag on it. So you don't need to tag it again at your lab, because unless you want to, certain rare scenarios, you might want to do a subcontracting and send part of it to another lab, in which case you would have to create a child package. But most of the time, that kind of thing, I'm not sure if subcontracting is even legal in Oklahoma. In some places it is. And so you'll already have a tag associated with it. If for whatever reason you have material that doesn't have a tag, then yes, you should add a tag to it. But definitely check with Metrc support or your regulators to make sure that whatever it is you're doing is the right way to do that.
Right. It's the all the questions through the chat. If you wanted to, if there are any other questions out there.
Great. So yeah, if you have any more questions, feel free to throw them into the chat. We'll get them at the end. So now we're going to go into our pro tips and gotchas. So basically the pro tips are things that you should be doing and best practices. The gotchas are things that you should keep in mind and look out for and how to solve them. So pro tips. You can save time by getting your clients to create orders in Confident instead of having you do it, obviously. They can do that with the manifest, they can do that with the samples, the package tags, and they can do it the old-fashioned way, just manually entering it. Regardless, it's always a good idea to try to get your samples, your clients to create their own orders first, and then that way you can just make any corrections as needed. You can minimize your errors by creating new orders from Metrc manifests. That's what we showed. So you don't have to type a bunch of information in. You don't mix up the strain name and the tag number, because it's all coming from Metrc and it should be right, if assuming Metrc's right. And again, both labs and clients can do this. So if clients want to do this, they just need to save their Metrc API key in Confident Cannabis. I think in Oklahoma, since we launched this, something like 20 clients have already done this just on their own, which is pretty cool. So they can do this by going to settings, organization, and regulators and adding their API key there. Oops. And then finally, you can submit results to Metrc for samples in any order status. So if you have an in-progress order and you want to submit the results for sample, you can. If it's already completed, you can. You can even submit it if it's been canceled. Not too sure why you would cancel an order and then submit it, but you could if you wanted to. So the data can be sent to Metrc at any order status, so long as it has the right package tag number and it has all the data that Metrc wants. If you attempt to send it before it has all the data, then you'll get an error saying, these fields are missing. Really, really big pro tip, can't stress this enough, use barcode scanners. Typing these long alphanumeric numbers are a huge pain. The capitalization does matter. All of them have an A at the beginning. If it's lowercase a, it won't work. So whenever you can, don't type them in. Use a barcode scanner. They're like $70 on Amazon. They work with Bluetooth, and you can connect it to a computer or iPhone or anything you want. So do that. Right. Now the gotcha. So these are things you want to look out for and be aware of. So Confident Cannabis cannot receive incoming transfers from Metrc. So we can do a lot of stuff with Metrc, but we can't receive incoming transfers. And that's by design. Metrc doesn't allow any third parties to do that. So you can do most everything you need to do in Metrc through Confident, but that's not to say that you'll never have to log into Metrc. You will have to log into Metrc to do certain things. And one of those things is receiving the transfers from your clients. So they'll initiate an incoming transfer. You'll see it as pending, and then you have to receive it. And then it'll be marked as accepted in Metrc. So you have to do that every single time. Otherwise, if you submit results for it, it'll either give you an error or it won't release it for sale. And then it'll get stuck in Metrc limbo. So you have to manually receive transfers in Metrc. We can only submit results to Metrc once. So that means that if you made a mistake and you need to submit new data for the same sample, you have to go into Metrc and edit it manually. Metrc doesn't allow us to submit data for the same sample more than once. Similarly, Confident can only submit results for packages that don't already have data. So if you manually enter data into Metrc, we don't know about that. We'll let you try to submit results again, but then Metrc will throw an error and say, nope, you can't overwrite the results Confident. They've already entered data. So that means that you have to go make whatever other submission you need manually in Metrc. And then Metrc requires complete lab data to be submitted for each sample. That's what these test batches are for. So they have these test batches that say, if it's raw plant material, here are all the things that we need. Otherwise, we're going to reject the submission. So if one of those fields are missing for some reason, or the wrong test batch associated, Metrc will reject it. And so just know that you have to have complete data before submitting. And if you attempt to submit and it fails, that doesn't mean you can't try again. You can enter the data and then try again. But if it's submitted successfully, then you can't try again. Yeah, and if you're having any issues and you're confused about what to do, just contact us, support@confidentcannabis.com. So this is something that we've been dealing with more recently. This is kind of a new issue that Metrc has I guess, bestowed upon the world. So before, we would submit complete test results to Metrc, and they would automatically move out of testing in progress to released for sale. And that was really convenient because the labs would just submit the data, it would all look good, and then immediately the client would see that batch is cleared for sale, and now they can go sell it. Some packages, however, are getting stuck in testing in progress after you've submitted data successfully. We've talked to Metrc about this. They've said that this is by design. They want you to contact their support team to release it for sale for some reason. I don't know if it's like a random airport check kind of thing, or if there's certain logic to it, maybe certain kinds of samples, maybe certain fields, certain values, who knows? We asked, is there a rhyme or reason? Is there anything we're doing wrong? They said, no, there's no rhyme or reason, and you're not doing anything wrong. So if that happens, just contact Metrc support. We are building a thing to get around that, for you to click a button to release it for sale, to kind of like override that. That's being worked on now, it's not done yet. But in the meantime, if you've submitted all the data, everything's right, and it's stuck in testing in progress, you have to contact Metrc support to release it, unfortunately. So as I mentioned before, clients might add the incorrect test batches to packages. So if it's a flower sample has an edible test batch. Like I showed you on the submission preview screen, you can add and remove the test batches, so only the correct ones remain. You have to do that for it to work. And then the last one is, a Metrc package can only be attached to one sample at a time. So if you have a sample that's associated to a particular package tag number, and then a colleague maybe doesn't see that and attempts to create a new order with that same sample in it, it'll block you, and it'll show, actually, sorry, it won't block you. It'll show an orange, warning saying, hey, just a heads up, there are 2 samples with the same package number on it. If you want to unattach it, you can contact us and we'll take care of that for you. All right, and that's our presentation. Any questions from the chat room? Thank you so much for listening.
Yeah, we have one that came in from Jessica. It was to clarify, if a client drops off their own sample and we do not realize the weight is incorrect until after they have left, would you recommend we just cancel the order we took and replace it with a new order when the client brings in a new sample? To which I replied, with this scenario, we recommend having the client cancel the transfer and re-enter the product in Metrc with the correct weight. Is that right?
Yeah, so yes, that's correct. Although the lab would have to reject the transfer. So in Metrc, this is assuming this is a Metrc transfer. In theory, right? If your client's using Metrc appropriately, your client won't be able to just come drop off a sample without it being in Metrc first. And so if it's in Metrc first, then they drop off the sample, you weigh it real quick, and then you see if it's correct and accept it on the spot before they leave, ideally. But if you don't do that and they leave, then you have to call them and tell them, hey, look, I rejected the transfer. You got to go back to your office and create a new transfer for this weight because it was wrong, right? So you have to kind of coordinate with them. But yeah, you should definitely can't reject the transfer in Metrc if it's way off. Like I said, there might be some regulatory wiggle room there. If it's like plus minus 10%, you can enter a different weight there. But better safe than sorry, probably just reject it.
All right. Another question. If we have a verified order in Confident Cannabis for potency/terpenes only, and the client calls to add additional assays, does this cause any upload communication errors with Metrc?
No. So I think in Oklahoma, terpenes are not required testing. And so they can buy, let's say, a flower compliance panel, which has everything that Metrc needs, but then they want to add terpenes to it. That's okay. You can always add terpenes or do it at the beginning, do it while it's in progress, whatever the case may be. You can always edit the sample and add new test packages. When you do that and you add terpenes, for example, terpenes don't get submitted to Metrc in Oklahoma, I think. So then that wouldn't cause any issues. We only send the data that Metrc is asking for. If it has additional data, it stays in Confident, it doesn't go to Metrc.
What if they call and ask to add in like a additional compliance test for Metrc microbial or something? And this was, so I think the question had, it was a potency and a terpene only test, and they had called to add in additional assays.
Well, they can always add additional assays. However, if it's something that's going to be reported to Metrc, it's got to have the right test batches associated with that package. And the test batch is what determines the tests that are needed. So if it's not a compliance test and it's just like an R&D test, then they would have an R&D test batch associated with it. But if they want to convert it to a compliance test, then I think you'd probably have to change the test batch to be the flower compliance, and it would have to have all of the other flower compliance stuff that's needed. If it's still an R&D test, then it's fine. You can add any R&D test that you want, as long as it has the R&D test batch designation in Metrc.
That concludes the questions in the chat.
All right, well, looks like we're 5 minutes early, which is always good. Thank you so much to everybody for your time, and we will be sending you an email with the recording as well as the slides shortly. Really appreciate it. And if you'd like to talk to us about using Confident Cannabis, if you're not familiar with it and you'd like to sign up, please email us at labs@confidentcannabis.com. Or if you have any questions or need help, email that same address or support@confidentcannabis.com. Thanks and have a great day. Bye.